Hello, friend. Come closer and let me ask you something before we begin. Have you ever chased a single dream so long that it stopped feeling like a choice and started feeling like a debt you owed yourself? A weight carried every day, through childhood, through fame, through fortune, until it became the only thing left to prove. Somewhere in Brazil, a small boy once looked at a shirt with a single number stitched on the back, and he decided that number belonged to him. Not because it was lucky, because it was sacred. That number was 10. In Brazil, the number 10 is inheritance, once worn by a barefoot boy from Minas Gerais who grew up to be called the greatest of all time. Every child who has ever kicked a ball down a dirt road there has imagined wearing it, even for one match, even in a dream. The boy we are talking about tonight wore it more than 100 times for his country, and became the man who scored more goals for Brazil than anyone in history. More than the king himself. He collected trophies on 3 continents and broke a transfer record experts swore could never be broken again. And yet, at the end of tonight's story, you will see him fall to his knees on a soaked field in New Jersey, in tears, because the one prize that mattered most to that little boy never came home with him. This is not really a story about money, though there will be plenty of it. It begins much smaller. A modest house where the electricity bill was not always paid on time, where a boy played football by feel in the dark because the lights had gone out again, and where a father knelt before every match to remind his son why any of it mattered. Stay with me, and you will see how a joyful childhood game slowly became the heaviest thing this man would ever carry. This is the story of Neymar da Silva Santos Jr. He was born on the 5th of February, 1992, in Mogi das Cruzes, in the state of São Paulo. His father, also named Neymar, had once chased his own version of this dream, playing seriously enough to believe a career might be waiting for him, until injuries closed the door before it had fully opened. Rather than grow bitter, he turned that unfinished dream into fuel for his son's future, becoming his first coach, his harshest critic, and eventually his manager. His mother, Nadine, was the quiet architect of the household, working long hours so that whatever else went missing, love at the dinner table never would. Money was scarce. There were nights the family could not pay the electric bill, and the house sat dark while a boy kept dribbling a ball across the floor by memory. The family later moved to São Vicente, a modest coastal town not far from the city that would soon change everything. The street outside the house became the boys' first stadium. No whistles, no cones, no coaches with clipboards. Only asphalt, bare feet, older boys who did not go easy on him, and a father who showed up every evening after work to play beside him, wanting his son to fall in love with the game before anyone tried to turn it into a job. Neighbors began noticing something strange about the skinny boy on that street. He did not just kick the ball, he negotiated with it, coaxing it around obstacles with a rhythm older Brazilians already had a word for. Ginga, the swaying footwork borrowed from capoeira, passed down through generations of players who treated the pitch less like a battlefield than a dance floor. Long before any scout arrived, that street already knew it was watching something unusual. In 2003, when the boy was 11, the family moved again, this time to the city of Santos. To most of the world, Santos is little more than a port on a map. To football, it is closer to a shrine. Decades earlier, a teenager from a poor mining town had walked into that same club and turned an unremarkable municipal ground called Vila Belmiro into one of the most famous small stadiums on Earth, wearing the number 10 before anyone fully understood what that number could mean. His name, of course, was Pelé. Walking through the gates of the Santos Academy, this new boy carried almost nothing material. No boots worth mentioning, no reputation beyond his own neighborhood. Just a ball, a father's belief, and that inherited rhythm the wealthier academy kids did not seem to have. Coaches who had trained hundreds of promising boys admitted they had rarely seen footwork like his at such a young age. Quickness alone is common in youth football. What set him apart was unpredictability. Defenders his own age genuinely could not guess which way he would go, because half the time he decided in the split second the ball touched his foot. Word travels fast in Brazilian football, and it soon crossed an ocean. When the boy was 14, representatives connected to Real Madrid made contact, offering a move that could have transformed his family's finances overnight. Santos, terrified of losing their brightest talent in a generation, fought hard to keep him, restructuring contracts to convince the family to stay. The boy stayed. Imagine being 14 and turning away the biggest club in world football because you were not ready to leave home yet. By 2009, at 17, he made his first team debut for Santos, stepping into the black and white shirt Pelé's generation had once worn. Brazilian writers, careful with hyperbole by profession, began comparing his movement to players from decades earlier, the kind of comparison that either crushes a young talent or sets him free to prove it correct. On the 27th of July, 2011, he proved it, in a moment that travelled around the world within hours. Santos were facing Flamengo when the ball reached him near the centre circle. Two defenders converged, expecting the routine pass. Instead, he slipped between them, released the ball to a teammate, took the return a heartbeat later, and dismissed a third defender before finishing calmly into the net. It was not the only path to a goal that afternoon, simply the most beautiful one, and he chose beauty over efficiency, as he so often would for the rest of his career. That goal won the Puskás Award for the finest goal scored anywhere in the world that year. He was 19. Months later, Santos lifted the Copa Libertadores, South America's most prestigious club trophy, for the first time since 1963, the year a young Pelé had carried the club to glory. 48 years separated those two triumphs, yet the thread felt unmistakable. Another boy from modest beginnings, dancing past defenders as though they were standing still, delivering history back to a stadium that had waited patiently for it to return. The world does not simply admire talent like that. It begins to measure it, price it, and eventually it comes looking to buy it. In 2013, at 21, he left Brazilian football for the first time, signing with FC Barcelona. It is worth pausing on one smaller moment the wider world barely remembers today. 3 years earlier, in August 2010, an 18-year-old wearing Brazil's yellow shirt for the first time stepped onto the pitch at MetLife Stadium in New Jersey for a friendly against the United States. 28 minutes in, a cross curled toward the far post, and he rose above the American defense to head it home, his first ever goal for his country. He sprinted to the corner flag and kissed the crest on his chest, celebrating with the uncomplicated joy of a boy who could barely believe it was real. He had no way of knowing that, 16 years later, that same stadium would host the final act of his international story. Barcelona in 2013 was assembling one of the most fearsome attacking units football had ever seen. Lionel Messi, already regarded by many as the finest player of his generation, led that forward line, and Luis Suárez, one of the most clinical strikers on the planet, joined shortly after. Together with the new arrival from Santos, the trio became known simply as MSN. In a single staggering season, the three combined for 122 goals, more than any attacking trio in the sport's history, and Barcelona swept every domestic trophy on offer and marched to the Champions League final. That final was played in Berlin on the 6th of June, 2015, against Juventus. Barcelona led 2-1 deep into the match when, in the closing minute, they broke forward one last time. He collected the ball near the halfway line, surged forward, exchanged a quick pass, took the return, and drilled a left-footed shot into the bottom corner to settle it 3-1. At the whistle, he sank to the grass in tears. At 23, he had won the Champions League, completing a historic treble alongside Messi and Suárez. There is one more night from that era worth remembering, the one fans still call up whenever impossible comeback enters a conversation. On the 8th of March 2017, Barcelona hosted Paris Saint-Germain, needing to overturn a 4-0 first-leg deficit, a gap no team in Champions League history had ever closed. Even after clawing back to 3-1, the stadium had almost stopped believing. Almost everyone, except him. In the final minutes, he curled home a free kick, converted a penalty, and floated a 95th-minute cross that a teammate turned into the 6th and decisive goal, completing one of the most improbable turnarounds the competition had ever seen. Camp Nou did not just cheer that night, it shook. Behind the trophies, though, something quieter had been building. Messi was not merely a teammate, he was the undisputed heart of the club, and no matter how brilliantly the younger man played, he remained in most eyes second in that kingdom. The boy who had once dreamed of Pelé's crown had no interest in standing respectfully in someone else's shadow. He wanted a stage where the lights pointed at him first. Before we follow him to that new stage, we have to go back once more, to a night that reshaped how the football world viewed him. On the 4th of July, 2014, Brazil hosted the World Cup on home soil. In the quarter-final against Colombia, with minutes remaining, a defender drove a knee into his lower back. He collapsed instantly, unable to stand, and was stretchered off. Scans confirmed a fractured vertebra. His World Cup, played in his own country, was over before the semi-final even kicked off. From his hospital bed, visibly shaken, he later admitted how frightening the injury truly was. A few centimeters lower, he said, and he could have been paralyzed for life. He watched from a team hotel outside Rio as his teammates faced Germany in the semi-final without him. What followed was one of the most stunning collapses in the tournament's history. Germany scored 5 goals in under 30 minutes, and the final score read 7-1. A nation built around footballing greatness watched its team dismantled on live television. Beside the hospital bed, his father sat in silence, because there was nothing left to say. When the 5th German goal went in, he simply leaned over and kissed his son on the forehead. The same small ritual he had performed since the boy was small enough to ride on his shoulders. 2 years later, Brazil hosted the Olympic Games in Rio, and football's gold medal match paired the host nation against, once again, Germany. The stage was the legendary Maracanã, packed with supporters desperate to reclaim something taken from them 2 years earlier. Wearing the captain's armband and the number 10, he opened the scoring with a free kick. Germany equalized, and the match went through extra time into a penalty shootout. His kick, if scored, would deliver Brazil's first ever Olympic gold in men's football. He placed the ball, closed his eyes for one visible instant, and struck it into the roof of the net. He dropped to his knees, arms outstretched, as teammates buried him under a pile of bodies. For one night in his own country, the weight lifted completely, and the crowd simply let him play. One triumphant night, however beautiful, does not erase 4 years of hunger for something bigger, and by August 2017, that hunger led him out of Barcelona entirely. Paris Saint-Germain paid €222 million for his signature, more than double the previous world record. At 25, he became, and remains today, the most expensive footballer in the sport's history. At his unveiling, he told reporters he had come searching for a bigger challenge and that his heart had guided the decision. That bigger challenge had a specific shape, the Champions League trophy. Paris Saint-Germain, despite years of enormous spending, had never once lifted. Across 6 seasons there, he helped the club dominate domestically, collecting league titles and cups at a pace few clubs in Europe could match. The Champions League kept slipping away. Paris reached the final in 2020, only to lose it. And beside every one of those disappointments sat a second opponent, far harder to beat than any defence: his own body. A foot here, an ankle there, a knee, a hamstring. Nearly every season followed the same rhythm: brilliant form for a handful of matches, months on the sidelines, a slow climb back, then the cycle again. In September 2023, playing a World Cup qualifier against Bolivia, he scored his 78th international goal, moving him past the mark set decades earlier by the very man whose number he had once dreamed of wearing. Pelé had scored 77 goals for the national team. He now had 78, officially Brazil's all-time leading scorer. He did not celebrate with a wide grin. He pointed upward and lowered his head, because Pelé had also won 3 World Cups with that shirt, and he still had none. Passing the greatest name in his country's football history should have felt like a pinnacle. Instead, it felt like a reminder of what was still missing. Away from the stadiums, something else had quietly been growing for years. Back in Praia Grande, near the neighborhoods where he once played by candlelight, an institute bearing his family's name had opened its doors, offering thousands of children free schooling, sport, and swimming lessons they otherwise never would have had. He rarely spoke about it publicly, quietly building something that resisted being reduced to a number on a stat sheet. In August 2023, an offer arrived from Saudi Arabia few footballers could have refused, reportedly around $100 million a year, and he signed with Al Hilal. Barely 2 months later, everything unraveled again. Playing for Brazil against Uruguay, he went down clutching his knee, carried off in tears. Scans confirmed a torn ACL, along with meniscus damage, an injury that would keep him out for well over a year. He returned late in 2024, managed only a handful of appearances, then tore his hamstring, restarting the cycle. Across roughly 18 months at Al Hilal, he featured in only a small fraction of the club's matches. In January 2025, both sides agreed to end the contract early, and he flew home to Santos, the club where the journey had begun. A younger Santos forward, who had grown up idolizing him, welcomed him publicly as the prince returning home. He answered warmly, calling the younger player his successor and reminding him one mission still remained unfinished between them. A mission every Brazilian fan understood immediately. By then, at 32, he had accumulated nearly everything the sport could offer. A fortune worth hundreds of millions of dollars, one of the largest social media followings of any athlete alive, Brazil's all-time scoring record, an Olympic gold medal, a Champions League winners' medal, a school quietly changing thousands of lives back home. He still moved with that same boyish rhythm on the ball, that same visible joy, after everything his body and career had put him through. Almost everything, though, still amounted to almost enough. The one trophy that defined the dream since childhood, the World Cup itself, remained out of reach. Which brings us, at last, back to New Jersey, back to MetLife Stadium, the same ground where an 18-year-old had once scored his first international goal. On the 5th of July, 2026, Brazil faced Norway in the round of 16. He had struggled with fitness throughout the tournament, managing only fleeting minutes off the bench, while his calf continued to trouble him. Norway, led by their prolific striker Erling Haaland, had already surprised many by reaching the knockout stage at all. For most of the match, Brazil held their opponents at bay. Then, in the 79th minute, Haaland rose above the Brazilian defence to head home the opener. Barely 10 minutes later, he struck again, controlling the ball on the edge of the box, before driving a low shot beyond the goalkeeper to make it 2-0. Deep into stoppage time, Brazil were finally awarded a penalty. He stepped up, placed the ball calmly on the spot, and converted it, pulling the score back to 2-1. It was not nearly enough time to find an equaliser. 90 seconds later, the referee blew the final whistle. He sank to his knees and pressed his face into the turf as teammates rushed to console him. Speaking to the cameras afterward, still visibly shaken, he said simply that he had tried, that his story with the national team had started at that very stadium, and now it was finished there too. 80 goals for Brazil, 3 more than the record he had inherited from Pelé, the most any player had ever scored for that shirt. And still, at the end of it all, no World Cup to place beside that record. We have travelled a long distance tonight, friend, from a dark street in São Vicente where a boy chased a ball by feel, to a rain-soaked pitch in New Jersey, where a grown man wept into the grass. From a father's forehead kiss before a neighborhood match, to 80 goals scored on the largest stages the sport has to offer. But if you take only one thing from this story, let it be this. His career was never really about trophies at all. It was about something Brazilians have a name for: jogo bonito, the beautiful game. Football not as warfare or labor, but as rhythm, as joy, as art performed with the feet. He carried that idea everywhere, to Spain, to France, to Saudi Arabia, and back home again, refusing to let business or endless expectation strip the dance out of the sport he loved. The world, though, rarely measures beauty. It measures medals, transfer fees, championships lifted under bright lights, because those things are countable. Beauty resists that kind of accounting, and so, for years, plenty of people looked at an unfinished trophy case and decided the whole story was somehow less impressive. Let me ask you something before we close. Have you ever done something beautiful that nobody bothered to measure? Stayed late to help someone struggling? Cooked a meal for a friend having a hard week? Finally made that phone call you kept putting off? There is no trophy for any of that, no record book entry, but it matters, the same way it mattered to a poor boy from São Vicente the first time he made a ball dance the way he wanted it to. If you asked him today to name his proudest achievement, he would probably not mention the Puskás Award, or the Olympic gold, or even the Champions League medal. He would more likely point to that quiet institute back in Praia Grande, in the same neighborhood where he once played football by memory in the dark, where thousands of children now walk through the gates each week, not chasing transfer records, but simply learning, swimming, laughing, dreaming a little, the way he once did. He played like a boy his entire life. The world kept weighing him like a man, tallying every missing trophy against every goal, as though joy itself needed justifying with silverware. But underneath the scrutiny, the boy from the dark street never actually left. So the next time his name comes up, do not let the memory begin and end with the tears in New Jersey. Picture instead a skinny kid running barefoot down a São Vicente street, laughing simply because the game felt like enough. Picture rows of children walking through the gates of a school built from a dream that once had nowhere else to go. Perhaps that, quietly, was always his greatest goal. Not the one struck into a net, but the one built brick by brick, far from any stadium, where nobody was counting. Some things worth carrying are heavy precisely because they matter. Carry them anyway. Thank you for spending this time with me tonight, friend. I would love to know which part of this story stayed with you longest. And one more question worth sitting with. Do you believe he still has one more World Cup left in him by 2030? Take care of yourself, and until next time, rest well.